A bullied teen stood up for a kid, not realizing he saved the president's grandson until weeks later, when the black SUVs rolled silently into his neighborhood. But that moment of courage had already changed everything for Noah Bennett, though he wouldn't understand how deeply until much later. The locker slammed shut with a metallic clang that echoed through the hallway like the final bell of judgment. Noah flinched, his shoulders hunching instinctively as though to shield himself from the sound, from the laughter that followed. His fingertips trembled slightly against the cold metal, a small betrayal of the calm he fought to maintain on his face. "Hey, ghost boy, still talking to your dead daddy?" Bryce Kellerman's voice carried the practiced cruelty of someone who had discovered a wound and learned precisely how to reopen it daily. Noah didn't turn around. 17 years old, tall but perpetually slouched, his dark hair falling across eyes that rarely lifted to meet anyone else's. This was the armor he'd constructed. Not looking back, not engaging, becoming as invisible as the nickname they'd given him. 3 years since the accident that took his father. 3 years of his mother working double shifts at the hospital. 3 years of Noah drifting through the halls of Westridge High like a shadow, speaking only when necessary, existing but rarely living. Home wasn't much different. Their small 2-bedroom apartment felt cavernous in its silence. Noah dropped his backpack by the door, the thud against the worn carpet the only sound breaking the emptiness. His mother wouldn't be home for hours. The kitchen counter held a note beside a plastic-wrapped sandwich. "Dinner shift again. Eat something real. Love you." He touched the paper briefly, his fingertips lingering on the looped letters of her handwriting. Even in her exhaustion, she tried. It was the trying that broke his heart most days. Noah moved to the window overlooking the street below, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. October in Massachusetts painted the world in burnished oranges and deep reds, but the beauty felt distant, as though viewed through the wrong end of a telescope. Everything good seemed to exist in some faraway dimension he could no longer access. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Check on Mrs. Abernathy today. She hasn't been answering." Mrs. Abernathy lived 2 floors down, an elderly widow who sometimes paid Noah to carry her groceries or change light bulbs. His mother worried about her. Noah sighed, but the request gave shape to his empty afternoon. He grabbed his keys and headed downstairs. The hallway of the apartment building smelled of old carpet and someone's attempt to mask it with lemon-scented cleaner. Noah knocked on 2B, waiting for the shuffling footsteps that usually followed. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. "She's not answering for you either?" Noah turned to find Mr. Reeves from 2A standing in his doorway, arms crossed over his chest. "Been knocking all day." Not like her. A flicker of worry tightened Noah's chest. "Do you have the super's number?" 20 minutes later, they discovered Mrs. Abernathy had fallen in her bathroom. She was conscious but couldn't move, hadn't been able to reach her phone. The ambulance took her away with promises to contact her daughter in New Hampshire. Noah stood on the sidewalk watching the red lights disappear around the corner, feeling strangely hollow. He hadn't saved her exactly, but he'd been there. It was something. The next morning, the incident with Mrs. Abernathy felt like a dream as Noah pushed through the front doors of Westridge High. The familiar dread settled in his stomach, heavy as stone. First period, then second, then lunch. The hours stretched before him like an endurance test. It was during lunch that Noah first noticed the kid. Small for his age, probably a freshman, maybe even 8th grade, sitting alone at the far end of a table, hunched over a book. Nothing remarkable except for the way Bryce and his friends kept glancing at him, smirking in that way that Noah recognized all too well. The way predators look at prey they've already marked. Noah lowered his eyes to his own untouched sandwich. Not my problem. He'd learned the hard way that intervening only made things worse. Better to stay invisible. Better to... A crash followed by laughter. Noah looked up to see the kid's lunch tray on the floor, milk pooling around scattered food. Bryce loomed over him, all false innocence. "Oops. Didn't see you there, new kid. Maybe if you weren't so small." The boy said nothing, just stared at the mess with a resignation that struck Noah like a physical blow. He recognized that look, had seen it in his own mirror countless times. The acceptance that this was simply how the world worked for people like them. Something shifted in Noah's chest, a tectonic movement of emotion he couldn't immediately name. Before he could think better of it, he was standing, moving across the cafeteria floor like someone else was controlling his body. "Leave him alone, Bryce." The words hung in the sudden silence. Noah couldn't believe they'd come from his mouth. Neither could anyone else, judging by the stunned expressions around him. Bryce recovered first, his surprise morphing into amused disbelief. "Well, look who found his voice. Ghost Boy's got something to say. Noah's heart hammered against his ribs, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the way the smaller boy was looking at him now, with a mixture of surprise and something else, something that looked dangerously like hope. Just leave him alone. Noah repeated, his voice steadier this time. He didn't do anything to you. Bryce stepped closer, close enough that Noah could smell the mint gum he was chewing. And what exactly are you going to do about it? The question hung between them, heavy with 3 years of unanswered taunts, of shoulders bumped in hallways, of whispered jokes about a father who would never come home. Noah didn't have an answer. He hadn't thought this far ahead, but the smaller boy was suddenly beside him, standing straight despite barely reaching Noah's shoulder. He doesn't have to do anything, the boy said, his voice surprisingly steady. Because unlike you, he's not alone. It was such an absurd statement. Noah was nothing if not alone, that it startled a laugh from him. The sound was rusty, unfamiliar, but it broke the tension in the room. For a heartbeat, confusion flashed across Bryce's face, as though the script he'd been following had suddenly been rewritten. The lunch monitor finally noticed the commotion, her heels clicking against the linoleum as she approached. What's going on here? Bryce stepped back, the model student once more. Nothing, miss. Harper, just an accident. Miss. Harper looked skeptical but merely pointed to the mess. Get that cleaned up. To Noah's surprise, Bryce actually went to get paper towels. The crowd dispersed, the momentary drama over. Noah found himself standing alone with the smaller boy, who was looking at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Thanks, the boy said simply. I'm Ethan. Noah. The name felt strange on his tongue, as though he was introducing himself to someone for the first time in years, which he realized he was. Ethan smiled, a quick, bright thing. I know. The janitor arrived with a mop and the moment broke. Noah retreated to his table, his sandwich still untouched, his mind replaying what had just happened. It wasn't much. He hadn't thrown any punches or made any grand speeches, but it was the first time in 3 years he'd made himself visible. After school, Noah half expected to find Bryce waiting to finish what they'd started, but the parking lot was quiet. He began the walk home, the autumn air crisp against his face, his thoughts still tangled around the lunch incident. Hey, wait up. Noah turned to find Ethan jogging to catch up with him, his backpack bouncing against his thin shoulders. He slowed his pace, unsure why the kid was following him, but not having the heart to tell him to get lost. You walk this way too? Ethan asked, falling into step beside him. Noah nodded. Maple Avenue. I'm on Elm. That's just past your street, right? Another nod. They walked in silence for a block, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. Noah stole glances at the smaller boy, noting the expensive sneakers, the careful haircut, the way he carried himself with a confidence that seemed at odds with his size. You're new, Noah finally said. Not a question. Ethan looked up at him, squinting slightly against the afternoon sun. Yeah, started last week. Wait, where from? DC and originally, but we move around a lot. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't a topic he wanted to explore further. Noah understood boundaries. They walked another block in companionable silence before Ethan spoke again. That guy, Bryce, he gives you a hard time a lot. The question was casual, but Noah sensed a deeper curiosity behind it. He shrugged. Used to be worse. What changed? Nothing had changed, not really. Noah just got better at disappearing. But saying that out loud felt pathetic, so he just shrugged again. Ethan seemed to accept this, nodding thoughtfully. People like that, they're just scared. Noah snorted. Bryce isn't scared of anything. Everyone's scared of something. Ethan kicked at a pile of leaves, sending them scattering across the sidewalk. My dad says people who need to make others feel small are usually terrified of how small they feel themselves. Your dad sounds smart. A shadow passed over Ethan's face, so quickly Noah almost missed it. He is. Too smart sometimes. They reached the corner where Maple Avenue branched off from the main road. Noah hesitated, then gestured vaguely down his street. This is me. Ethan nodded but made no move to continue on his way. Instead, he said, Want to get a coffee or something? There's that place on the corner. Noah blinked, surprised by the invitation. He couldn't remember the last time someone had asked to spend time with him voluntarily. Why? The bluntness of the question didn't seem to offend Ethan. If anything, he looked amused. Because I'm new and don't know anyone. Because you stood up for me when you didn't have to. Because it's Tuesday and Tuesdays are boring without coffee. A laugh escaped Noah, his second of the day. It felt strange, like exercising a muscle long unused. It's a hot chocolate kind of day, not coffee. Ethan's smile widened. Even better. The coffee shop was warm and smelled of cinnamon and chocolate. They found a table by the window, steam rising from their mugs, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street outside. Noah couldn't remember the last time he'd sat in a public place without feeling the weight of eyes on him, without the whispers and the pity. With Ethan, there was none of that, just questions about movies and books, complaints about the algebra teacher, stories about places Ethan had lived. 7 schools in 4 years, Ethan said, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on the window. You stop trying to make friends after a while. Noah understood that too well. Must be hard. Ethan shrugged, but his eyes held a weariness that seemed much older than 14 or 15. You get used to it, but this time might be different. We might stay through graduation. That would be good, Noah said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. They parted ways as the streetlights came on, Ethan continuing down toward Elm Street with a wave and a promise to find Noah at lunch tomorrow. Noah walked home slowly, feeling as though something had shifted in his world, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. The apartment was still empty when he got home. His mother had left another note, checking on Mrs. at the hospital after work. Sorry, don't wait up. Love you. Noah made himself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, the silence no longer quite as oppressive as it had been that morning. The next day at school, Noah found himself looking for Ethan. They hadn't explicitly agreed to meet, but somehow Noah knew he would be there, by the same tree where they'd parted after their hot chocolates. Sure enough, the smaller boy was waiting, a book open in his hands but his eyes scanning the crowd. Morning, ghost boy, Ethan said with a grin that took any sting out of the nickname. Noah rolled his eyes but found himself smiling back. Morning, new kid. They fell into step together, heading toward the main entrance. Noah was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. The invisible boy suddenly visible, the new kid who should have been at the bottom of the social hierarchy somehow exempt from its rules. Bryce was by the doors, surrounded by his usual entourage. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Noah and Ethan, but he made no move toward them. If anything, he seemed wary, as though yesterday's confrontation had disrupted some fundamental law of nature, and he wasn't quite sure how to proceed. Noah tensed as they approached, but Ethan just nodded politely as they passed. Morning, he said, as though they were all old friends. Bryce's mouth opened, then closed without a sound. Noah couldn't believe it. In all his years of torment, he'd never seen Bryce Kellerman at a loss for words. What was that? Noah asked when they were safely inside. Ethan shrugged, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. Kill him with kindness, my mom always says. The morning passed in a blur. Noah found himself paying attention in class for the first time in months, raising his hand to answer questions, even smiling at his English teacher when she expressed surprise at his suddenly completed homework. It was as though Ethan's presence had woken him from a long sleep. Lunch came, and Noah hesitated at the cafeteria doors. What if yesterday had been a fluke? What if Ethan had found other friends, cooler friends? What if... There you are! Ethan appeared at his elbow, seemingly out of nowhere. I was starting to think you were avoiding me. The relief Noah felt was embarrassing in its intensity. Just thinking. Ethan led the way to an empty table, chattering about his morning classes, seemingly oblivious to the stares that followed them. Noah found himself relaxing, drawn into Ethan's story about his history teacher's bizarre obsession with the War of 1812. They were halfway through lunch when the trouble started. Noah didn't see what happened, only heard the crash and the all-too-familiar sound of Bryce's laughter. He turned to see a freshman girl on the floor, her lunch tray upended beside her, her face flushed with humiliation. Guess she should watch where she's going, Bryce said loudly, high-fiving one of his friends. The girl scrambled to gather her things, her eyes downcast, her movements quick and panicked. No one moved to help her. The lunch monitors were nowhere to be seen. Noah felt the same shift in his chest as yesterday, that strange tectonic movement of emotion. But before he could act, Ethan was on his feet, moving toward the girl with purpose. Here, let me help, he said, kneeling beside her, gathering scattered books. Noah watched, frozen, as Bryce's attention shifted to Ethan. Look at that, the new midget's got a girlfriend, Bryce sneered. Better be careful, she might step on you. The girl looked up, mortified. Ethan just smiled at her, ignoring Bryce completely as he handed her a notebook. Don't worry about it. These floors are slippery. The deliberate misinterpretation of events hung in the air like a challenge. Bryce's face darkened. Are you deaf, new kid? I said, I heard you. Ethan interrupted, his voice calm but carrying across the now silent cafeteria. I just didn't think it was worth responding to. Someone gasped. Noah was on his feet before he realized he was moving, crossing the space to stand beside Ethan. The smaller boy glanced up at him, a flash of gratitude in his eyes. Bryce looked between them, calculation replacing anger on his face. One-on-one, he could handle either of them, but two-on-one changed the equation. Whatever, he finally said, waving a dismissive hand. You two losers deserve each other. It wasn't much of a retreat, but it was enough. The tension broke, conversations resuming around them. The girl mumbled thanks and hurried away, clearly wanting to escape the attention. That was either very brave or very stupid, Noah said quietly as they returned to their table. Ethan grinned. Why can't it be both? After school, they walked home together again, stopping for hot chocolates that were becoming a ritual neither acknowledged. Ethan was quieter than usual, his eyes distant, his responses delayed as though his mind was elsewhere. Everything okay? Noah finally asked as they sat at their usual window table. Ethan started, then smiled apologetically. Sorry, just thinking about something my dad said this morning. Something bad? No, just... Ethan traced the rim of his mug with one finger. He asked if I was making friends here, if I liked it better than the last place. Noah waited, sensing there was more. Ethan sighed. I told him I did, that I'd made a friend. He glanced up, a flash of vulnerability in his eyes. That's okay, right? To say we're friends? The question caught Noah off guard. Friends. The word felt foreign, almost dangerous in its simplicity. He hadn't had a friend since before his father died, since before he became Ghost Boy. Yeah, he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. That's okay. Ethan's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Good. Yep, good. Because I already told him, and it would be awkward to take it back. Noah laughed, the sound coming easier now, less rusty with each use. Can't have that. They finished their drinks and headed out into the crisp evening air. At the corner where their paths diverged, Ethan hesitated. Want to come over tomorrow? After school? My mom makes these ridiculous chocolate chip cookies on Fridays. They're basically legendary. Noah blinked, caught off guard by the invitation. To your house? Unless you'd rather hang out in your secret underground lair. Ethan teased. But I've got a new game I thought you might like. The casual way Ethan assumed Noah would be interested, would say yes, would want to spend more time together. It was disarming. I'd have to let my mom know. Obviously, Ethan bounced on his toes, a habit Noah had noticed when he was excited about something. So yes. Yeah, Noah said, surprised at how much he meant it. Yes. Friday dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that hinted at winter's approach. Noah dressed with more care than usual, actually checking his reflection in the mirror before heading out. His mother had already left for her early shift, but she'd texted her approval for his after-school plans. Have fun! Actual fun, not the sitting in silence kind. Love you. School passed in a blur of anticipation. Noah found himself watching the clock, impatient for the final bell, in a way he hadn't been since elementary school field trips. When it finally rang, he met Ethan by the front doors, trying not to look as eager as he felt. Ready? Ethan asked, practically vibrating with energy. Noah nodded, falling into step beside him. They took their usual route, but instead of stopping at the coffee shop, they continued past Maple Avenue toward Elm Street. Elm Street was different from Noah's neighborhood. Older homes set back from the road, large trees lining the sidewalks, an air of established prosperity. Ethan led the way confidently, turning up the walk of a large colonial-style house with dark green shutters and a wraparound porch. This is you? Noah asked, suddenly self-conscious about his worn jeans and secondhand jacket. Ethan nodded, fishing keys from his pocket. For now, anyway. The interior of the house was warm and smelled of cinnamon and chocolate. The promised cookies, Noah realized. The entryway opened into a spacious living room with comfortable-looking furniture and bookshelves lining one wall. It was nice without being intimidating, lived in without being cluttered. Mom? Ethan called, dropping his backpack by the stairs. I brought Noah. A woman appeared from what Noah assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was tall and elegant, with Ethan's same dark hair and bright eyes. Her smile was immediate and genuine. Noah, I've heard so much about you. I'm Laura. She offered her hand and Noah shook it, grateful his palms weren't sweaty. Are you hungry? The cookies are just about ready. Starving, Ethan declared, heading toward the kitchen. Come on, Noah. They spent the afternoon playing video games in the basement. which had been set up as a combination entertainment room and home office. Ethan was better at the racing games, but Noah surprised himself by holding his own in the strategy ones. They ate cookies until Noah thought he might be sick, and then ate more anyway because they were, as promised, legendary. It was nearly 6 when Noah realized how late it had gotten. "I should probably head home," he said reluctantly, setting down the controller. "I'll walk you," Ethan offered. "Just let me tell my mom." Noah followed him upstairs to the kitchen, where Laura was chopping vegetables for dinner. A tall man in a suit was leaning against the counter, a glass of water in his hand. He looked up as they entered, his expression friendly but assessing. "Tabor, Dad!" Ethan's surprise was evident. "I didn't know you were home. Just got in," the man said, setting down his glass. His gaze shifted to Noah, curious but not unfriendly. "And this must be Noah." "Yes, sir," Noah said automatically, extending his hand. "Noah Bennett." The man's handshake was firm, his eyes never leaving Noah's face. "James Warren, Ethan's told us about you. All good things." There was something about Mr. Warren that made Noah stand a little straighter, an air of authority that seemed to fill the room. Ethan had mentioned his father worked in government, but hadn't elaborated. "Noah has to head home," Ethan explained. "I was going to walk with him." "I can drive you," Mr. Warren offered. "It's getting dark early these days." Noah started to decline. It wasn't that far, but Ethan was already nodding. "That would be great, Dad. Thanks." The drive to Noah's apartment building was short and mostly silent. Mr. Warren asked a few polite questions about school and how long Noah had lived in town, but there was something distracted about his manner, as though his mind was elsewhere. In the back seat, Ethan filled the silences with chatter about the video games they'd played. When they pulled up outside Noah's building, Mr. Warren frowned slightly at the peeling paint on the exterior, the security door with its broken lock. Noah felt a flush of shame creep up his neck. "Thanks for the ride, Mr. Warren," he said quickly, reaching for the door handle. "And thanks for having me over, Ethan." "Same time Monday?" Ethan asked, leaning forward between the front seats. "We can walk home together again." Noah nodded, a warm feeling spreading through his chest at the casual way Ethan assumed their friendship would continue. "Yeah, sounds good." Mr. Warren's expression softened slightly as he watched the exchange. "It was nice to meet you, Noah. You're welcome at our house anytime." "Thank you, sir." Noah got out of the car, waving as they drove away. He watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner before heading inside, a strange mixture of emotions swirling inside him. The weekend passed in a blur of homework and chores. Noah's mother had the weekend off for once, and they spent Saturday catching up on laundry and grocery shopping. On Sunday, they visited Mrs. Abernathy in the rehabilitation center, bringing her magazines and a plant for her room. The elderly woman fussed over Noah, telling everyone who would listen that he'd saved her life. "I just knocked on your door," Noah protested, embarrassed by the attention. Mrs. Abernathy patted his hand. "You were there when I needed someone." "That matters, Noah." On Monday morning, Noah woke feeling lighter than he had in years. The prospect of seeing Ethan, of having someone to talk to at lunch, of walking home together, it changed everything about school. Even the thought of facing Bryce couldn't dim his mood. Ethan was waiting by their usual tree, but something was off. His smile seemed forced, his eyes darting around the schoolyard as though looking for something or someone. "Everything okay?" Noah asked as they headed inside. Ethan shrugged, a jerky movement unlike his usual fluid confidence. "Fine. Someone just didn't sleep well." Noah didn't push. He understood bad days, understood the need for space even when surrounded by people. But as the morning progressed, Ethan's strange mood persisted. In the classes they shared, he seemed distracted, his usual sharp wit dulled. At lunch, he picked at his food in silence, responding to Noah's attempts at conversation with one-word answers. It wasn't until they were walking home that Ethan finally spoke up. "I might be leaving." The words hit Noah like a physical blow. "Leaving? Like moving?" Ethan nodded, kicking at a stone on the sidewalk. "My dad's job. Something came up. He says it might just be temporary, but..." He shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its hopelessness. "It's never temporary." Noah felt something cold settle in his stomach. Of course this friendship, this brief reprieve from loneliness, would be snatched away. That was how his life worked. "When?" he managed to ask. "Don't know yet. Soon, probably." Ethan glanced at him, something like desperation in his eyes. "I told them I didn't want to go, that I finally had a friend, that I was settling in. But it's not up to me." They walked in silence for a while, the weight of Ethan's revelation hanging between them. When they reached the coffee shop, Noah hesitated. Hot chocolate? He offered, though neither of them seemed in the mood for their usual ritual. Ethan shook his head. I should get home. Dad wanted to talk to me about everything. Right. Noah tried to keep the disappointment from his voice. See you tomorrow then. Yeah, Ethan attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tomorrow. Noah watched him walk away, a small figure getting smaller with distance, and felt something in his chest tighten painfully. Just when he'd started to feel like a person again, like someone who mattered, it was being taken away. The apartment was empty when he got home, his mother working another evening shift. Noah dropped his backpack by the door and stood in the silent living room, suddenly overwhelmed by the familiarity of his loneliness. It felt worse now, after those brief weeks of connection. He was reaching for his phone to text his mother when a knock at the door startled him. It was too early for her to be home, and they never had visitors. Cautiously, Noah approached the door and peered through the peephole. Two men in dark suits stood in the hallway, their expressions serious and professional. One held up a badge that Noah couldn't make out clearly through the distorted view. Fear spiked through him. Had something happened to his mother? To Mrs. Abernathy? With trembling fingers, he opened the door, leaving the chain on. Noah Bennett? The taller of the two men asked. Noah nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. Is my mom okay? The man's expression softened slightly. Your mother is fine, son. We're with the United States Secret Service. We'd like to speak with you about an incident that occurred at your school a few weeks ago. Secret Service? Noah's mind raced, trying to make sense of the words. I don't understand. May we come in? The second man asked. We promise this won't take long. Against his better judgment, Noah closed the door, removed the chain, and reopened it. The men entered, their eyes scanning the apartment with professional detachment. Noah led them to the small living room, gesturing awkwardly toward the couch while he perched on the edge of the armchair. What's this about? He asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The taller agent sat forward, hands clasped between his knees. You recently befriended a new student at your school, Ethan Warren. It wasn't a question, but Noah nodded anyway. Is he okay? Did something happen to him? A brief smile flickered across the agent's face. Ethan is fine, but there's something you should know about him. About who he is. The second agent opened a leather portfolio and removed a photograph, placing it on the coffee table between them. It showed a familiar family, the President of the United States, his wife, and between them, smiling awkwardly at the camera. Ethan, Noah whispered, the pieces falling into place with dizzying speed. Ethan is the president's grandson. The agents exchanged glances. James Warren is the president's son-in-law, the first agent confirmed, which makes Ethan the first grandson. Noah finished, his mind reeling. But why is he here? Why was he at my school? The second agent leaned forward. That's classified information, but I can tell you that the family occasionally takes breaks from Washington for Ethan's well-being. The president believes his grandson deserves as normal a childhood as possible, despite the circumstances. Noah thought back to Ethan's comments about moving frequently, about never staying in one place long enough to make friends. It made a horrible kind of sense now. Why are you telling me this? He asked. The first agent's expression turned serious again. Because the day you met Ethan, the day you stood up for him in the cafeteria, you intervened in a potentially dangerous situation. We've been reviewing the security footage. Noah blinked, confused. Dangerous? It was just Bryce being a jerk. He's always like that. Perhaps, the agent conceded. But our job is to assess all threats to the first family, no matter how small they might seem. Your actions that day demonstrated courage and integrity. You put yourself at risk to help someone you didn't even know. The second agent nodded. The president and first lady were impressed when they heard about what you did. They asked us to convey their personal thanks. Noah felt heat rising in his face. I didn't do anything special. Anyone would have, but they didn't. The first agent interrupted gently. You did. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Ethan, his friend, the kid who loved hot chocolate and was terrible at remembering his locker combination, was the grandson of the most powerful person in the country. And now he was leaving, because that's what happened when you were part of the first family. You didn't get to have normal friends or go to normal schools for very long. Is that why he's leaving? Noah asked, his voice small. Because I know who he is now? The agents exchanged another glance. That decision hasn't been finalized, the second agent said carefully. But security protocols sometimes require adjustments. They stayed a while longer, asking Noah questions about his interactions with Ethan, about who else Ethan had spoken to at school, about whether Noah had noticed anyone unusual paying attention to them. Noah answered as best he could, still trying to process the revelation. When they finally left, extracting a promise from Noah not to discuss what he'd learned with anyone, the apartment felt even emptier than before. Noah sat in the silence, staring at the wall, trying to reconcile the Ethan he knew with the public figure he'd glimpsed in newspaper photos and television clips. It was the same person, he realized. Ethan had never pretended to be someone else, had never lied about who he was. He just omitted the parts of his identity that would have changed how people treated him. Just as Noah had learned to keep his own pain private, to avoid the pitying looks and awkward conversations that followed revelations about his father's death. In that moment, Noah understood why Ethan had been drawn to him, why their friendship had formed so quickly and felt so natural. They were both living half-lives, both hiding essential parts of themselves from the world. The realization brought with it a surge of determination. If Ethan was leaving because of security concerns, because Noah now knew his secret, well, Noah would just have to prove he could be trusted with it. The next morning, Noah waited by their usual tree, not knowing if Ethan would show up or if he'd already been whisked away back to Washington. The minutes ticked by, the first bell approaching, and still no sign of him. Noah's heart sank. Then, just as he was about to give up and head inside, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the schoolyard. Ethan spotted him and hesitated, uncertainty in every line of his body. Noah raised a hand in greeting, trying to convey with the simple gesture that nothing had changed, that they were still friends regardless of who Ethan's grandfather was. Slowly, Ethan approached, stopping a few feet away. Hey, Noah replied, searching his friend's face. I was afraid you'd already left. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. They told me they talked to you yesterday. Yeah. Noah wasn't sure what else to say. That was unexpected. A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. Sorry about that. It's standard procedure when someone finds out. I didn't find out, though, Noah pointed out. They told me. Same difference. Ethan scuffed his shoe against the ground. So now you know why I have to leave. Why I always have to leave. The defeat in his voice made Noah's chest ache. But you don't want to. It doesn't matter what I want. It should. The words came out fiercer than Noah intended. It should matter. Ethan looked up, surprise flashing across his face. It's complicated. So explain it to me. Noah gestured toward the school building. We've got all day. For a moment, Ethan's familiar grin broke through the gloom. You're going to be late for first period. Worth it. They skipped first period, finding a secluded corner of the library where Ethan could talk without being overheard. He told Noah about life in the White House, about the constant security, about never being able to just be a normal kid, about how his mother, the president's daughter, had fought for these brief periods of normalcy for him, these temporary escapes to small towns where he could attend regular schools and make regular friends. But it never lasts, Ethan concluded, his voice hollow. Something always happens. Someone recognizes me, or there's a security concern, or Grandpa needs Mom and Dad back in Washington for something important. Noah listened, trying to imagine what it would be like to live under such scrutiny, to never truly belong anywhere. That's why you didn't tell me. Ethan nodded. I'm not supposed to tell anyone. Security risks and all that. But also, he hesitated, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. I wanted you to like me for me, not because of who my grandfather is. I do like you for you, Noah said simply. Finding out about your grandfather doesn't change that. Something tight in Ethan's expression eased. Really? Really? Noah leaned forward, suddenly urgent. And that's why you shouldn't have to leave. Not because of me anyway. I can keep a secret. Ethan's smile was sad. It's not just about keeping secrets. It's about protocols and security assessments and a million other things I don't understand. Once someone outside the approved circle knows, it changes the whole equation. So change it back, Noah insisted. Tell them I'm trustworthy. Tell them I won't tell anyone. I already did. Ethan met his eyes directly. That's why they came to talk to you instead of just moving us in the middle of the night. They're considering alternatives. Hope flickered in Noah's chest. What kind of alternatives? I don't know exactly. Dad was on the phone with the head of security for hours last night. Ethan shrugged. I guess we'll find out soon. The second bell rang, signaling the start of their next class. They gathered their things and headed out of the library. the conversation shifting to more normal topics as they entered the crowded hallway. But underneath the routine of the school day, Noah could feel the weight of uncertainty, the knowledge that everything had changed. At lunch, they sat at their usual table, but the easy camaraderie of before was strained by the unspoken reality of Ethan's potential departure. Noah found himself watching his friend more closely, noticing the small details he'd missed before. The way Ethan's eyes constantly scanned the cafeteria, the subtle nod he exchanged with a man Noah had assumed was a substitute teacher, but now realized must be a security agent. Is it always like this? Noah asked quietly. Always being watched? Ethan followed his gaze to the agent and nodded. You get used to it. Sort of. Doesn't it drive you crazy? Sometimes. Ethan poked at his lunch without enthusiasm. But they're just doing their job. Keeping me safe. From what? From who? Noah looked around the ordinary school cafeteria, trying to imagine what threats could possibly exist here. Ethan's expression turned serious. People target my family, Noah. Not just politically, but physically. There are death threats, kidnapping threats. It's real. The gravity of the situation suddenly hit Noah with full force. This wasn't just about Ethan being the president's grandson. It was about Ethan being in danger because of who his grandfather was. About Ethan never being able to truly let his guard down. Never being able to fully trust the people around him. I'm sorry, Noah said, the words inadequate but sincere. I didn't really understand before. Ethan's smile was tight but genuine. Most people don't. It's okay. After school, they walked home together as usual, but there was a new tension between them, a sense that each moment might be their last together. When they reached the coffee shop, Ethan stopped. Hot chocolate? He offered, an olive branch of normalcy. Noah nodded, grateful for the familiar ritual. They found their usual table by the window, steam rising from their mugs, the late autumn sun casting long shadows across the street outside. If you do have to leave, Noah said after a while, will you at least stay in touch? Or is that against the rules too? Ethan looked down at his mug. It's complicated. There are protocols for communications outside the approved circle. Right. Noah tried to keep the bitterness from his voice. More protocols. But, Ethan continued, glancing up with a hint of his old mischief. Rules can be bent, especially if my mom argues for it. And she likes you. She does? She says you're a good influence on me. Ethan grinned. Can you believe that? You, a good influence. Noah laughed despite himself. Clearly she doesn't know about the time we put salt in Bryce's water bottle. That was your idea, and it was a good one. They finished their hot chocolates and headed out into the crisp evening air. At the corner where their paths diverged, Ethan hesitated. Come over tomorrow, he said suddenly. After school, there's something I want to show you. Noah nodded, curious but not wanting to push. Okay. And Noah? Ethan's expression turned serious. Whatever happens, I'm glad we met. I'm glad you stood up for me that day. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken goodbyes. Noah swallowed the lump in his throat. Me too. The next day at school passed in a blur of anticipation and dread. Noah found himself watching the clock, both eager for and dreading the final bell that would bring him closer to whatever Ethan wanted to show him, and possibly closer to their farewell. When the bell finally rang, Ethan was waiting by his locker, his expression unreadable. Ready? Noah nodded, falling into step beside him. They took their usual route, but instead of stopping at the coffee shop, they continued past Maple Avenue toward Elm Street. The walk was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. When they reached Ethan's house, Noah was surprised to see several black SUVs parked in the driveway. Are those Secret Service? Ethan confirmed, his expression tightening. Something's happening. They entered through the front door to find the house in a state of controlled chaos. Men and women in suits moved purposefully through the rooms, speaking in low voices. Laura Warren was in the living room, deep in conversation with a tall woman whose bearing screamed authority. She looked up as they entered, her expression softening at the sight of her son. Ethan. And Noah, good, I'm glad you're here. What's going on, Mom? Ethan asked, tension evident in every line of his body. Are we leaving? Laura exchanged a glance with the woman beside her. Not exactly. There's been a change of plans. She gestured toward the woman. This is Director Harlow. She's the head of my father's protective detail. Director Harlow stepped forward, her handshake firm as she greeted Noah. Mr. Bennett, it's good to meet you in person. You too, Noah replied automatically, though he'd never heard of her before this moment. Laura touched her son's shoulder gently. Your grandfather wants to meet Noah. Ethan's eyes widened. What? Here? No, in Washington. Laura's smile was both proud and apologetic. He was quite impressed when he heard what happened at school. Both of you standing up to that bully together. Noah felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. The president wants to meet me, but I didn't do anything special. Director Harlow's expression remained professional, but there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. On the contrary, Mr. Bennett, your actions that day and your continued friendship with Ethan, despite learning of his identity, suggest a character that the president admires greatly. Ethan was staring at his mother, hope and confusion warring on his face. Does this mean we're not moving again? We get to stay. Laura squeezed his shoulder. That's still being discussed. But your grandfather has made it clear that he values your happiness as much as your security. And if having a friend like Noah contributes to that happiness, she shrugged, a gesture so similar to her son's that Noah had to smile. Well, that factors into the equation. Director Harlow cleared her throat. Which brings us to the purpose of our visit today. Mr. Bennett, we'd like to invite you to accompany Ethan and his family to Washington this weekend, to meet the President and First Lady and to discuss certain arrangements that might allow Ethan to remain in school here while maintaining appropriate security protocols. Noah's mind reeled. The President wanted to meet him, to thank him for being kind to his grandson. It was so far outside the realm of his normal life that he could barely process it. I'd need to ask my mom. He managed to say, Of course, Laura agreed. In fact, we'd like to invite her as well. She's welcome to join us for the entire weekend. She's working, Noah said automatically. She's always working. Laura and Director Harlow exchanged glances. I'm sure arrangements could be made with her employer, the director said smoothly. If she's willing. It was all happening so fast. Noah looked at Ethan, who was watching him with barely contained excitement. You knew about this? Ethan shook his head. Not until this morning. Dad told me something was happening, but not what. I thought we were leaving for sure. And now? A grin spread across Ethan's face. The first real one Noah had seen in days. Now I think we might get to stay. If your mom says yes, if you say yes. The hope in his voice was impossible to resist. Noah found himself nodding. I'll ask her. I'm sure she'll say yes. The rest of the afternoon passed in a whirlwind of explanations and preparations. Noah called his mother at work, stuttering through an explanation that probably made little sense. To his surprise, she didn't question it, just asked to speak with one of the adults present. After a long conversation with Director Harlow, she agreed to the weekend trip, sounding dazed but pleased. They were to leave the following evening, flying to Washington on a private government plane. Noah would need to pack a suit for the formal dinner on Saturday night, casual clothes for the tour of the White House that Ethan had promised, and anything else he might want for a weekend away. This is insane, Noah muttered as Ethan walked him home that evening. Completely insane. Ethan laughed, bouncing on his toes in that way he did when excited. Wait until you see the White House. The public tours only show like 10% of it. I'll show you the good stuff. Noah shook his head, still trying to process everything. Your grandfather is the President of the United States. Yep. Ethan popped the P sound, grinning. But he's also just my grandpa who sneaks me candy when my mom isn't looking and falls asleep watching old westerns. The normalcy of the description against the extraordinary circumstances made Noah laugh. This is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. Get used to it, Ethan said, nudging his shoulder. Being friends with me comes with some weird perks and some weird complications. Noah added, thinking of the security agents who would now be a permanent fixture in their lives. Ethan's expression sobered. Is it worth it? All the complications? Noah didn't hesitate. Yes. The simple answer seemed to satisfy Ethan. They walked the rest of the way in companionable silence, both lost in thoughts of the weekend ahead and the strange new shape their friendship was taking. When they reached Noah's apartment building, Ethan stopped. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 5. The car will take us to the airfield. Okay. Noah hesitated, then added, thank you for everything. Ethan looked puzzled. For what? You're the one who stood up for me. You're the one who befriended the weird new kid without asking questions. You're the reason I might get to stay in one place for more than a few months. And you're the reason I'm not invisible anymore, Noah said quietly. The reason I remembered how to talk to people, how to laugh, how to be a friend. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a recognition of the weight behind the words. That's what friends do, right? They see each other, even when no one else does. Right. Noah smiled, feeling a lightness in his chest that had been absent for 3 long years. Even when no one else does. As he watched Ethan walk away, Noah thought about the strange path that had led him here. 3 weeks ago, he'd been Ghost Boy, drifting through the halls of Westridge High, invisible and alone. Now he was preparing to fly to Washington to meet the president, all because he'd decided, in one impulsive moment, to stand up for a kid being bullied. One small action, changing everything. Noah turned and headed into his building, eager to tell his mother about the incredible turn their lives had taken. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow, to next week, to the future stretching out before him. A future that was suddenly full of possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. And it had all started with the simplest of choices: to be kind when kindness wasn't easy, to be brave when bravery seemed foolish, to be a friend when friendship felt like a distant memory. One small action, changing everything, not just for Ethan, but for Noah too. Ghost Boy was gone. In his place stood Noah Bennett, visible at last, ready to step into the light of a life he was only now beginning to reclaim.